Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel and the first of a little mini-series that I am looking to start up, looking ahead to the future. One 4-year cycle is over, but another one is just about to begin. So in these videos, I'm going to go through nation by nation and look at some of the big question marks for their teams following the Rugby World Cup, looking into the future over the next couple of years and the next 4 years, building up towards Australia in 2027. So drop a comment down below, let me know if you enjoy the video, let me know about any of the points that I touch upon, and let me know what you think the big question marks are for your sides going forward as well, because I will eventually get round to them. So whichever nation you support, how do you assess them? What are the questions for them looking ahead over this next cycle? But first up this week, it is Wales. So let's get into it. So I wanted to start with Wales because I find them quite an interesting case study, really, in terms of an international team, considering where they are and some of the challenges that they face over the next few years, and in particular for the Six Nations in a few months' time, but also where they've been and reflecting on the Rugby World Cup. In the end, losing in the quarter-final to Argentina, it felt like a really disappointing ending. I know Welsh fans were understandably quite gutted because they did brilliantly to get through what was quite a competitive Pool C. I know it wasn't on the harder side of the draw, but even so, you look at that with Fiji and Australia, Portugal proved to be no mugs, Georgia as well. It was a really fascinating pool, and Wales came out on top of that, which when you consider where they were, look back at the Six Nations, the threat of a player strike before that game against England. They have had all sorts of off-the-field issues within the union. The club game is struggling, and a lot of those problems still remain if we want to talk about them moving forward. But the Rugby World Cup overall can be considered a success for Wales, I think. And then we start to look forward. And the first thing I wanted to chat about was squad turnover. This is the first thing I wanted to show you. This is the starting teams that Warren Gatland selected in the Rugby World Cup, the starting 15s, essentially. And I think if you look in particular at the Fiji game, the Australia game, and the Argentina game, because Portugal and Georgia, they rotated a little bit more. Those, their 3 toughest games and their 3 most important games, I think you can see Warren Gatland had a pretty good idea of the players available to him, who his starting team was. So in all of those teams, Gareth Thomas, Ryan Elias and Thomas Francis were the front row. Will Rowlands and Adam Beard were the second row. You had Jack Morgan as an ever-present in the back row. Taulupe Faletau for most of those. He then got injured, so Aaron Wainwright went to number 8 and Tommy Reffell came in at open side for the Argentina quarter-final. We then had Gareth Davies and Dan Biggar as the half-back pairing, and the back line didn't change for those 3 matches either. Josh Adams, Nick Tompkins, George North, Lewis Rees-Zammit and Liam Williams. So actually, over the course of the World Cup, they were pretty settled, really. But I think if we look now onto the next slide, the positions of players we definitely know who have been part of it that are no longer available, particularly looking at the Six Nations, there are some obvious holes that need filling. In particular at 10, the retirement of Dan Biggar, who has been superb, I think, for Wales over the last decade or more. And Liam Williams as well. Liam Williams hasn't retired from international rugby, but because he's gone to play in Japan, he's not going to be available for the Six Nations. So therefore it leaves quite a big hole at fullback. So fly half and fullback, the key positions as we look to the future. But I think we can expand on that as well. I'm going to come back to fly half and fullback and some of the options for Warren Gatland in a second. But if I go one slide on, these are the names in yellow that are still available now, but I think you could question over the next 4 years whether they still will be available when we get to the next World Cup. You look at Gareth Thomas and Thomas Francis, they're still available now. I would imagine they'll still be the first choice when it comes to the Six Nations if they are fit, but you look at their age profile, another 4 years might be a bit too much. Will Rowlands is possibly similar. Dan Lydia is definitely in there. I wonder whether he will play again for Wales. We'll wait and see. Obviously, Taulupe Faletau, Gareth Davies as well, and then George North. So those guys are still available, but how much longer is Warren Gatland going to be able to get every single bit of potential and quality out of those players? I think is something quite interesting to consider when you look at this Wales team. It's settled. There's a couple of key positions in fly half and fullback, but also I think there are some other guys that over the next 4 years we might start to see transfer out. But let's start with arguably the most key position. I think undoubtedly the most key position for this Wales team moving forward, and that is fly half. So Dan Biggar retired. We've seen Gareth Anscombe is unavailable. because he's moved away. Reece Patchell has kind of dropped out of the reckoning a little bit at the moment. Sam Costello is clearly, I think, the guy that they believe will be the regular number 10 if he's fit moving forward. I think in all the different options Wales have, then he is the player that has the most potential, I think, to be a real top quality starting fly half. But he's unavailable, if you've missed the news. He's out at the moment. We're not sure if he's going to be back in time for the Six Nations. If he is, it might be kind of close to the start of the tournament. How much rugby will he have under his belt? So that puts a pretty big question mark, I think, over the Wales fly half position. So let's run through some of the options that I think are there. First of all, Callum Sheedy. Playing at Bristol Bears, he's under the 25 cap limit, but he's still on the same contract. He hasn't signed a new contract, so basically he's still available. That might change if he's still on the amount of caps he is when he has to sign a new deal. Sheedy's an interesting one. At his best, he has been very, very good. He was the starting fly half for a Bristol team that tops the Gallagher Premiership. He can fit into a system really well. I think there are some concerns over his kicking, and it's not that he can't kick under pressure. If you look back on the Six Nations around COVID time when no one was at the Millennium under Wayne Pivac, he came in, he kicked some of the clutch points to secure Wales's victory over England. Even for Bristol, when he was a real youngster in the Championship playoff final against Doncaster, I was there for that game I think he was still a teenager then. He kicked the points in a pressure game, packed out crowd at Ashton Gate for Bristol to get promoted back to the Premiership. He's capable of being a good kicker. Is he consistent enough would be my question. And also, has he quite reached those levels in terms of his overall play that we saw him get to a couple of years ago? Maybe. We've seen some good stuff at the start of this season, but that would still be my question mark with him. Next up, we've got Ioan Lloyd, who was recently at Bristol. He moved to Scarlets in the summer. He has been a fullback. He played a lot at 12 last year for the Bears. He got moved around that back line and was never really able to establish himself as the fly half there. He's had some good performances for the Scarlets recently to start the URC season. Incredibly highly rated and thought of as a youngster. I spoke to an agent actually who saw him play when I think it was Wales under 18s or Wales under 20s, something like that. There, as a lot of agents are scouting, and Ioan Lloyd absolutely stood out a couple of years ago. He has got bags of talent. He's so much potential. Will he be the guy to step up in the absence of Sam Costello? And then another name to say, Owen Williams, not necessarily a younger guy. He's a more experienced option for the Ospreys. I just wonder whether he could be a short-term solution for Wales, potentially. If they're not sure in a test arena who the starting 10 is with Costello out, whether he could be someone that steps in. If you're not sure on Lloyd yet at international level, if you don't think the form of Sheedy warrants that jersey yet, he could be another one. But any others, you can let me know in the comments section. Ben Thomas has been referred to by Warren Gatland, the Cardiff utility back, potentially as someone that could fill in there. Hasn't played fly half for a few years though. You've got Will Reid at the Dragons, Kai Evans as well, who's mainly a fullback. In fact, I'm going to get on to him now. Fly half though for Wales, massive question marks over that selection in my opinion. What they do there is going to be fascinating. If Costello is back in time, he will be the guy. But if he's not, in which direction do they go? Wales fans, you can let me know. Let's move on to fullback though. So, Liam Williams and Lee Halfpenny not available. Liam Williams, as I said, he will be available for the summer tour, but he's not available for the Six Nations. So in the here and now, looking at this Wales team moving forward, what direction do they go in? Lee Halfpenny obviously retired. A few different options. You've got Tom Rogers, first of all. Plays for the Scarlets. He made his Wales debut against Canada back in 2021. He was part of the wider training squad for the World Cup. He also plays on the wing, so he's a potential option I think that Warren Gatland can look at. And Kai Evans as well, who, as I just mentioned, he could potentially play fly half. We've seen him come in. He played a part of the squad in the World Cup warm-ups. Is it one of those less experienced guys? But the other one I wonder, and the reason I put it there, is Lewis Rees-Zammit. He's played fullback before, and I also think at the moment, everyone would be pretty confident in saying Rees-Zammit, Josh Adams and Rio Dyer are the best back three players available to Warren Gatland. I certainly would anyway. And if you want to get all three of them on the pitch, do you play Lewis Rees-Zammit at fullback? Josh Adams has played fullback as well, so he's potentially another option. But do you go in that direction and then you see which other players come through? I've seen Jacob Beetham at Cardiff mentioned, Cameron Winnett at Cardiff as well. I think there are some younger players coming through, but whether they're quite at the level to be thrown in the test arena yet, I'm not so sure. So fullback and fly half, absolutely essential. Let me know what you make of the idea that Rees-Zammit goes fullback and then you've got Josh Adams and Rio Dyer on the wings. But if we look at the squad as a whole, I've obviously mentioned the players that definitely aren't there, and I flagged up some of the ones who are maybe available now but might not be available looking forward to the future. I think there's a real core to this Wales team, and it's one of the positives for them. In a weird way, I think Alan Wynne-Jones, Justin Tipuric, not going to the World Cup and not being available and retiring maybe helped out the transition of this team a little bit more. They could start that process at the World Cup. If you look at the team, this is mainly from those starting teams from the World Cup, the starting 15s. I know there are wider guys in the squad, which I'll get onto. So some of those older players that were in yellow, obviously Thomas Francis and Gareth Thomas, available now, 4 years' time on their ages they are now, Faletau, North, Davies and Will Rowlands. But look at the core. Rhys Zammit, 22. Chris Chunza, 21. Dafydd Jenkins, 20. Mason Grady, 21. Jack Morgan as the captain as 23. Tommy Reffell, 24. Dowie Lake, 24. Aaron Wainwright, still only 26, and he's been to 2 World Cups. I think there's a real core that Warren Gatland can rely upon to build this team around. And actually, if you look at what a lot of the Wales players said throughout the World Cup, is those younger guys were a big part of the leadership. They played a key role in that team. It wasn't just the likes of Liam Williams and Dan Biggar, for example, driving the team on. A lot of those younger players were driving standards as well. And there's other players that I haven't even mentioned there. Max Llewellyn, Ben Carter, guys that were part of the wider squad ahead of the World Cup that also will come back into consideration for selection. So I think there is young players there, but there are still some issues. And actually, the main position that I wanted to touch on once more is front row, specifically prop. So I know I've highlighted Will Rowlands, but I think he's still been performing at a very high level. He's been good for Wales over the last few years. I think he could well go until the next World Cup and still be key. And actually second row with Chunza, Jenkins, Adam Beard, I think there are guys that are, I think they're pretty well stocked in the second row, basically. Scrum half as well is potentially one. As I say, Gareth Davies is there. He's 33, so the next World Cup could be a struggle, but you do have Thomas Williams, you've got Kieran Hardy again, who are kind of experienced options. For me, it's front row and prop that will be the bigger area of concern for Warren Gatland. I'm going to get onto the tight heads in a minute. In terms of the loose heads, I think Gareth Thomas will stay in. He's been a very, very solid and good selection. Will it be Nicky Smith, who's 29, who's kind of been the understudy for Thomas, that's still there as well? And then they seem to be sticking with Corey Domachowski. He hasn't lit the place up at international level yet. 27, but he's often been involved. I wonder whether Warren Gatland will continue to stick with him, or do they go back to Rhys Carre, who you might remember wasn't part of the World Cup squad because he wasn't able to pass the fitness tests in time. It was kind of a bizarre story that we've probably all forgotten about now because the World Cup's happened and there's been so much to talk about since then, but could he come back in? But tight head, I think, is the real area of concern. Thomas Francis has been their best, certainly scrummaging option for a long time. He'll be 35 at the next World Cup, and he's playing in Pro D2 this year. Is that a good enough standard for him to make the step up into international rugby? Now, he's experienced, he knows what it takes, but there's a question that's kind of lingering in the air. And the other thing actually to point out here, all 3 tight head props that were in Warren Gatland's squad for the World Cup are playing abroad this year. So in terms of their availability for build-up to Six Nations and tours and things like that, that's going to be hampered. But Thomas Francis, for the time being, will still be there. I think it's whether he's there at the next World Cup that's the big question. Not saying he won't be at 35, it's very capable, but when you get to your mid-30s, injuries, things like that, you start to wonder. You've then got Dylan Lewis and Henry Thomas. Those are the other guys in the World Cup squad. Dylan Lewis at Harlequins, Henry Thomas at Montpellier. Or do they start to look towards some of those younger options? So Harry O'Connor, the 23-year-old, he came off the bench against the Barbarians recently. Is he someone that starts to come into that team? And Kieran Azarati as well, who impressed Warren Gatland apparently during the summer camps. Is he someone that they continue to invest in? So I think tight head prop in particular is a big, big issue for Warren Gatland. So where are Wales? What is the future of Wales? Well, as I say, I think there are reasons to be positive. I think they have a young core there that Warren Gatland can build around. But there are big, big questions. Fly half and fullback, the obvious ones, and then, as I've just mentioned, tight head prop. Is there the talent coming through? I think that's going to be the big thing for how successful Wales are over this next 4-year cycle and going forward even into the Six Nations. Do they have the talent coming through that's able to step up and fill the shoes of some of those guys that are stepping away from the game? And that probably speaks to the wider issues in the Welsh game that I spoke about at the start of the video. Issues with the regions, the domestic game not being in a good point, not being well run by the WRU how big an impact are those issues going to have on the players that are coming through, the talent that is going to be available there? Let's hope there is still the talent. Warren Gatland over the years has always been able to do a brilliant job of, regardless of the problems facing the sport overall in Wales, of still having a national team that is very, very competitive. And actually you would say he is an experienced enough coach and the type of coach that will be able to get the best out of what is available to him. What does that look like for Wales in the future? A World Cup that actually, based upon where they were before the tournament, I think they'll be pretty pleased with. Big questions for them going forward. Are they capable of answering them? What does the future of Welsh rugby look like? Let me know what you think in the comments section. Let me know what you made of this kind of video. I don't know, I tried to pick out some things that I thought were interesting. I hope you found it interesting as well. And don't forget, what about your team? Are you a Springbok fan, an All Black fan, a Wallabies fan, an England fan, an Ireland fan? Whoever it is, what are the big questions for your side going forward? Put it in the comment section because I will get round to uploading video on them in the not too distant future. So appreciate it. If you haven't already, I'd love it if you subscribe to the channel. If I can earn your subscription, then that's a really positive thing for me. And also, drop a thumbs up on the video, like the video, give it a boost. Let's get it to as many rugby fans on YouTube as is possible. But that's it for me. I'll see you in the next one.